Hi, my name is Shawna Christenson. I'm a teacher in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, and I am so privileged to be able to work with a group of gifted students. Our school works with students from the age of pre-K through 8, and what our middle school students have been able to do with regards to aerospace has been particularly amazing. So I'm hoping today to share with you how important it is to be able to help students really form that science identity early on, to imagine themselves as the science kid now so that they can go on to become that science career professional of the future. So, I'd like to give you a little bit of background about myself first. You'll see that in addition to being a teacher, I'm also the founder of the Aerospace Public Policy Institute, or APPI. And our mission is to really educate, communicate, advocate, and legislate on behalf of space policy. And it kind of got started when I was the public speaking and debate teacher at our school. And about a year after I had been hired, they brought on board my colleague, with whom you may be hearing some of their presentations later, but Kevin Simmons, who founded his aerospace program at the school. And some of my middle school students would come in and talk with me about these things called cube satellites. And I didn't even know what they were talking about. And essentially, over time, I saw that they were not only talking about them, but they were actually building CubeSats. And of course, as the program got established, they were sharing those exploits with people, whether it was the local city hall or even with our local Congress people. And so that's how I got involved, because my debate students and my public speaking students said, "Hey, how come my friends at other schools don't have this unique opportunity to build satellites? And how can we change that?" So essentially, we formed a kind of a policy team as part of, and that's where the Aerospace Public Policy Institute came into play, where we've written some legislation with our congressperson, and it really basically to help them increase awareness of the CubeSat launch initiative here in the United States in general. But overall, we're on a mission to help teachers and students really understand how we can start even earlier than we once thought in order to help form that science identity. We see that the STEM workforce, and particularly aerospace, is an aging and graying workforce. And because of we don't have a lot of people coming up in that pipeline to replace the graying workforce, we need to do a better job, at least here in this country, of making sure students are in that pipeline and ready to go. That means engaging them early, maintaining that engagement, and helping them to identify with themselves as somebody who belongs in this career field. I mean, when we think about it, really young children, and I mean going back as far as toddlers, they are innate learners. They're always asking questions. They're super inquisitive, and they're really excited as far as getting, the answers to things. And so a lot of their original identity about who they are and what they're capable of occurs at home. But we as teachers can help them to kind of formulate these identities as well, especially if it's not happening at home. So in education, we learn about educational theorists, and a lot of these names are familiar to you. I want to focus specifically today on Erickson and the idea of these competency stages, because we know that children as young as 5 through 7 start picking up on who they are, their identity, as far as what they are competent in. So they start recognizing, oh, I seem to be really good at math. I seem to be really good at dancing. I'm a great football player. And when this happens, they kind of start to see themselves and what they ultimately want to do when they become adults. And that leads, of course, to the social cognitive career theory, the idea that if we identify as a particular career or as a particular kind of person, that lends itself to the career that we will explore later on. And so that's really where the pipeline starts. Now, oftentimes we don't think about our careers until we are in high school and we're about to make that selection to go off to college and decide what it is that we're going to do with the rest of our lives. But having had the opportunity to work with students as early as kindergarten and certainly through middle school, I've come to realize that one of the major mistakes we make in this country is not engaging our students earlier in helping them to realize that they are capable of things that they often envision as outside of their comfort zone. And so we've got to start that pipeline a lot earlier. And that's where being a teacher can kind of help a student form the idea that they're a science kid. I mean, we know that the first school is home. A child looks around, they know their parents first and foremost, and those are their first role models. So if they're in a home where their parents are successful, they're educated, and particularly if they are in a STEM field, that child already realizes that this is something possible for me. Oftentimes, these homes also have a large amount of of literature, and they have opportunities to engage in videos or other manipulatives. But this isn't always true for every student, and certainly in the case of the United States, not true for what we call the underrepresented populations. And these are populations who are underrepresented in STEM careers in the future. So, which is why it's even more important to get them started earlier, identifying themselves as a potential career option for themselves. And so that's why teachers can make the difference. You see these little kindergartners down in the bottom here, and they're wearing lab coats. And this day in particular was not a dress up day. This day, students were presenting out their science fair findings, but they had actually done the hands-on work of experimenting. Science fair is really important at our school. And the science teacher decided that she was going to help them play the part so that they could become the scientists that she wanted them to be. And so by investing in these little coats, and they got on and they presented out, they became scientists that day. And I can assure you that to this day, when they're doing their science lessons, they don their lab coats, and they will forever going forward see themselves as scientists potentially of the future. So we need to do more as teachers to encourage this kind of thought process. And we really need to kind of revamp what we're doing, at least here in the United States, as far as what we call a STEM curriculum. So, as we start to look at some of these underrepresented populations, it's not a surprise that women are not as well represented as men in STEM fields. Although this has been changing somewhat and we've seen an increase, there are still some disparities. And in particular, this disparity is huge when it comes to the pay gap. And again, making some progress, but we still have disparities here. And in fact, some of those disparities where we see it is not just with the pay scale, but also with the number of women who enter a STEM career and who stay in that career field as they're in college and beyond. Even those who do, they are underrepresented in some of these more hardcore, the hard sciences, and instead seem to be opting into the life sciences. So if you look at the chart and you're seeing ultimately, where the salaries are, the numbers of people who are involved in that, we know that ultimately in this pipeline, we have to do more to help girls in particular feel that they are competent in this area. I always like to share this story, especially with my students. And it is a reminder for me as a teacher that sometimes what we say can make all the difference in how a student can ultimately perceive themselves. In about fifth grade, I had started to notice that while everything had come easy to me up to that point, math was starting to be a little bit more challenging. I was still doing fine, but I was having to work at it a little bit more. And about that time, they introduced these Fun Friday activities where you might get to select the game club or dance club or art club. And one of the options was math club. And so I decided that as much as I would prefer to go hang out at the game club with my friends, I probably needed to join the math club so that I could maybe reinforce those skills. And in retrospect, I think that was a pretty astute move for a fifth grader. But I went to my first meeting and I didn't fit in. And you could tell that those who were in the math club were serious mathletes, as we come to call them now. And I remember the teacher being very kind, but at the end of the session, he said to me, I think you would probably you'd be more happy in the dance club. And I didn't really think about that at that time until I went, oh, you're probably right. If the teacher is advising me that I don't belong here, that must mean that I am not good at math. And while I know that he did not mean it to come out that way, moving forward in my academic career, math was no longer important to me, and I just knew I wasn't good at it. And it completely affected how I did academically. And I believe the career choice that I made was also impacted now that I've learned a little bit about this, cognitive identity theory. So the importance of establishing early on that even when we don't feel comfortable with something, that we can learn something is something that we want to consider, especially when it comes to women and our other underrepresented groups. For example, people of color, right? And certainly here in the United States, we know that when we look at the end of that pipeline for STEM, it's really this old white guy, right? That's the standard. And people of color, because they're underrepresented, oftentimes they're then not able to be those role models for their children up and coming either. So combine that if you are a woman of color, you can imagine how difficult it is to see yourself in those forms at all. But this is really important because, again, if they're not seeing, if they can't identify with a role model, someone who looks like them, if a student joins a program, even makes it into college, but looks around and nobody looks like them in the team or the club or the class that they're in, and they never have a teacher either or a role model or mentor who looks like them with whom they can identify, it is unlikely that they're going to be retained in that field. Because there's certainly a socioeconomic impact, as you can see by this chart here. We know that STEM careers are ultimately the highest paying careers, not only now, but certainly projected out through the future. And imagine if you're a woman or a person of color, and then the third subgroup I'm addressing, a lower socioeconomic status, then your chances of ever rising above that are even more difficult. So again, we must do more to encourage students early on to start identifying themselves in careers that they might not otherwise have the opportunity. Now, we know the careers of the future, the ones that are going to be heavily focusing on STEM, are going to also be employing what we call the 21st century skills. And oftentimes these skills are kind of, overused. We hear them as, it's almost like as a buzzword. We can and must engage these students not only in the idea of inspiring them to form an identity early on, but enable them with the skills in order to be able to do that. And that's kind of where Aerospace Public Policy Institute came into play, where we really focus on the 4 C's. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to share with you some activities that we've been able to do at our school, which kind of encompassed all of these, the idea of a real world hands-on STEM education as we talk about the importance of shifting a STEM curriculum. And of course, that's oftentimes seen in what we call project-based learning. You heard me talk earlier about cube satellites and the CubeSat launch initiative, and honestly, it's something that's it's so new to the concept of an elementary or middle school student, because these are most of the time seen at the university level. But when my colleague brought them to our school, what we noticed is it wasn't just that it was an amazing feat for middle schoolers to do, but that our younger students were at the school and they were getting excited about the idea of joining middle school to join our program. And in reality, I think we sometimes sell kids short. I mean, we assume that they're too little to do real work or to do orbital mechanics. That's beyond them. But that's not really true. And while we do work at a gifted school, the fact is that children in particular they're not really limited to what they think they can do. So when my colleague came and said, let's build a CubeSat, they had no idea that they shouldn't be able to do such a thing. And because his expectations were high, theirs rose to the occasion as well. Some of the activities that we did briefly, which I'll share with you, is that we really engaged with our community. Anytime we noticed that there was a STEM function going on, we attended. And eventually we were asked to present. We presented at our science museum. We do STEAM carts where some of our older students work with younger students. In addition, at our school, some of our older students, as you see by the pictures here, would go and do lab experiments with some of those same kindergartners that you saw earlier. But moreover, they would present about their CubeSat program in the community as well. So anytime you can get out in the community, that increases those 4 C's, but it also increases that hands-on real world experience. You don't have to be flying CubeSats to be able to do this. You can start with something really small, but you can see a few other hands-on activities that our students have done to kind of bridge the gap to reach out to the younger ones. Some of our students created this coloring book that you see here, the Let's Go to Space, where it was the history of the CubeSat program. It was translated by our world language students into both Spanish and into Mandarin. And you can see some mission patch designs that our students created that the CubeSat teams actually still use to this day. And so, anytime you can be part of anything in your community to engage is really something that you as an educator can do. And that encourages them to really get a feel for what's going on. So as we wrap up today, I just want to share with you the importance of making sure that we inspire our educators as well. One of the ways we can do that is to do the real hands-on work of joining organizations ourselves. I was very honored to receive a grant from the Florida Space Grant Consortium to send a stipend to teachers who wanted to learn about the hands-on aerospace activities that we do. And one of the main things that we recommend to teachers is that they join professional organizations, particularly the AIAA here in the United States, or the Space Foundation Teacher Liaisons, which is an international program. And if you're not already a member of those organizations, I suggest that you do so, that you join, especially the Space Foundations, because you're going to be offered not only the opportunity to network, but just a large number of resources that are available to help augment your classes and to really form those partnerships, not just outside applied in your community, but around the world that are really going to engage your lessons and help your students to achieve ridiculous goals. And ultimately, that's where I will close today with sharing with you. We look forward to creating that pipeline of the future. And I hope that you feel encouraged today to know that the work that you're doing with the students of today are going to ultimately build that STEM workforce of the future, but that we can start even earlier. And so I am excited to collaborate with you also. Thank you so much. And I look forward to hearing from you.